How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, 1 hour earlier than usual. That was yesterday and today. God willing, tomorrow we're back on the regular schedule, which will be Friday, so noon Pacific. Let's light up the darkness. So these wisdom candles, they last a few days. I don't, usually not a week, but about a week, a little less than a week. Do you know how many of these candles we've gone through? I think we're coming up on 200. It's unbelievable. We've been learning together for such a long time. Thank God and thank you for being here. Who's in the house? Paul in the great Northwest, Carla in Brazil, Tom in Pennsylvania, Bella in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota, Shandora in the Bronx. We had an escaped bull over in Newark today. Very funny considering what we're studying. Wow, an escaped bull in the streets. That's amazing. Melissa in Great Neck, Karen in Northern California, Guy in Ohio, Joe in the Inland Empire, Ella says shalom, Aoife in Florida, Marjorie says shalom, Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. If you follow me on Instagram or TikTok, I put up a video today basically thanking all the anti-Semites, all the Jew haters, for revealing themselves, for saying the quiet part out loud, for taking the hate in their hearts and revealing it publicly so that they can join the long list of losers like Pharaoh in Egypt and the Canaanites and the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Persians and the Greeks and the Medes and it goes on and on. The Romans, Royal Spain, Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and every generation they rise up to destroy us. The Holy One, blessed be, he saves us from their midst. And it has happened every single time that God kept his promise. Those who bless us will be blessed, and those who curse us will be cursed. And it's just extraordinary how comfortable the Jew haters are now just saying it publicly, saying it out loud. So thank you. Thank you for revealing yourselves. Thank you for revealing who you are. Thank you for taking your stand on the losing side of history. Better to know who these people are so that, God willing, they'll pass from this world sooner. And, what can I say? They won't have a place in the world to come. But really what prompted that, I got to tell you, we have to be so vigilant. Really, you got to take care of yourselves, everybody. I saw a video from Toronto where one of these, pro-Hamas demonstrations was, it seems like hundreds of people outside a Starbucks banging on the glass. I don't know what Starbucks had to do with it. I don't know if there were Jews inside the Starbucks. I don't really know what it was. But I saw that and it was chilling. We grew up in a world where, okay, we heard of pogroms, we heard of the Holocaust. It wasn't going to happen in America, in North America. Please take care of yourselves. Please remain alert. And please, all of us, thank God we're learning together. And let's, just more mitzvahs, more Torah learning, more sharing what we love about Yiddishkeit and God and Torah. Thank God for our allies. Thank God for all the people in this class, the Jews who are learning Torah and the non-Jews who are learning Torah, and that we're learning together. Thank God. Thank God we're doing this together. And may we all be safe and increase the safety and security of Am Yisrael everywhere and all our allies. We say Amen. Thank you to Wayne Marble for sponsoring today's episode of AT Daily in memory of Pearl. May Pearl's neshama, may her soul have an elevation, an awesome elevation in the world of souls. We say Amen. And Wayne, thank you so much for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say Amen. Let's get to the work. Let's get to the learning. Our daf today's page 42 here in Tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. We're working our way through chapter 4, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 5. The Mishnah said that with regard to an ox that gored a person and the person dies, if the ox was forewarned, the owner pays the ransom, but if it was innocuous, he is exempt from paying the ransom, right? The kofer. So this additional amount of money, which is not restitution of damage that it caused, but it's an additional payment that serves as an atonement for the owner of the ox. He didn't commit murder, but his ox killed a person. And if it was a forewarned ox, I mean, there's definitely some element of negligence there. And you can see why he needs to make that atonement. So we picked this up near the top of page 42a. And it was taught in another baraisa with regard to the verse that the owner of the ox shall be clear. It says that in the Torah, right after the ox gores. What we're talking about, by the way, is that an ox that kills a person is put down, and then it may not be eaten, and you cannot benefit from the body of this ox that killed a person, and then the owner shall be clear. So the owner of the ox shall be clear. So it is taught in another baraisa with regard to this verse that Rabbi Yosei HaGalili says it means that the owner shall be clear from paying compensation in the specific case of a woman who miscarried. In other words, if an innocuous ox, right, an ox, a tam, without a history of goring, causes a woman to miscarry, the owner is not liable to pay half the compensation for the miscarried offspring, right? So the case of the innocuous ox, the written Torah specifies a kind of damages that are paid. Now, remember, this is not a person, who went and slugged somebody or swung his axe wildly and it hurt somebody. It just happens to be the owner of an ox that has no history of being dangerous, and then it did something, right? It gored someone, and so he pays half the damages for that. So now the Torah does mention, the case of a woman who miscarries. Now, usually this is what the Torah talks about is when two men fight, and in the course of their fight, a woman who's standing nearby is hurt and she miscarries. What liability is there? So that's where a human with his own force ends up hurting somebody and causing a miscarriage. But that is as attenuated as it gets in terms of liability for damage. Being the owner of an innocuous ox is not going to qualify for that liability to pay damages, according to Rabbi Yosei HaGalili. Now, Rabbi Akiva said to him, it is unnecessary for this verse that you're using to teach that law is unnecessary because, in other words, we have already learned this. Doesn't it say with regard to paying compensation for miscarried offspring, quote, if men struggle and hurt a pregnant woman and her offspring emerge and there is no tragedy, meaning she did not die, the woman, he shall be punished as the husband of the woman shall impose upon him, and he shall give as the judges determine. Meaning he is going to be liable for the miscarriage, even though the woman herself survived the blow. The fetus did not. So from which it is inferred that men who cause a woman to miscarry are liable to pay compensation for the offspring. Them, yes, but the owner of an innocuous ox, no. This is what Rabbi Akiva is saying. And the Gemara comments, Rabbi Akiva is saying well. He states a reasonable objection. What would Rabbi Yosei HaGalili have responded to him? So Rav Ula, the son of Rav Idi, said it was necessary for the verse to teach this exemption, as otherwise it might enter your mind to say that this inference should be limited as follows. Men are liable to pay compensation for causing a miscarriage, but the owner of oxen that are comparable to men is not liable. Only some oxen are excluded from this law, and the distinction is the muad, or forewarned ox with a history of goring, versus the tam, the innocuous ox that lacks such a history. Just as men are categorically considered forewarned, we don't only impose full damages on a man who uses his force to hurt another person and say, well, he's only done that once before or no times before, so he's only going to have to pay half damages. No, he's considered like the muad, like the forewarned ox from the very first time, as opposed to oxen who are divided into innocuous and forewarned. So just as men are categorically considered forewarned, so too the oxen, which are contrasted with men in this case, are considered forewarned as well. Meaning we're only talking about forewarned oxen. We're not talking about innocuous oxen. But in the case of a miscarriage caused by an innocuous ox, its owner would be liable to pay compensation for miscarried offspring. Therefore, the merciful one wrote with regard to the innocuous ox, the owner of the ox shall be clear, to teach us that the owner of the innocuous ox does not have that liability. So Rava said in objection to this answer, the native is on the ground and the stranger is in the heavens. What does this phrase mean? This is actually a Talmudic, colorful expression for what the heck are you talking about? And it's derived from the idea in the curses in Deuteronomy that if Jews don't adhere to Torah, if we stray away from the commandments that our Father in heaven imposed on us, then it's going to go badly for us. And we, who are the spiritual people, the people of the book, who should be, spiritually elevated, will become, lowered, and our enemies will be raised. And we, there's also this same idea as, Jacob and Esau are always enemies, and when one is up, the other is down. And so, in the curses it said that, as long as the Jews, this is Moses adjuring the children of Israel on his last day in this world, right before he dies, and, they're going to go into Israel following Joshua in the initial conquest of the promised land. And Moses said, if you follow the Torah, you're going to have all these blessings, so many blessings. But if you don't, you're going to have these curses. And this is one of the curses, right? That you who should be on top will be down. So just sort of based on that verse, they're now using it as a metaphor to say what you just said is topsy-turvy, right? That the native, meaning the Jews, is on the ground and the stranger is up in the heavens, right? Because they don't have that place in heaven, but you understand, they're just using that as a metaphor for what you said is all backwards. Why is he saying this, right? Why is Rava saying you've got it all backwards? Because the aforementioned suggestion contradicts the principle that the law of a forewarned ox is more stringent than that of an innocuous ox. Rather, Rava said a different way for Rabbi Yosef HaGalili to counter Rabbi Akiva's objection. It was necessary for the verse to teach this exemption, as otherwise it might enter your mind to say that only men are liable to pay for miscarried offspring, but the owner of oxen that are comparable to men is not liable. Just as men are categorically considered forewarned, so too the oxen, which are contrasted with men in this case, are considered forewarned as well. And for miscarriage caused by innocuous oxen, their owners are also exempt due to the Kal V'chomer inference. The merciful one then wrote that the owner of the innocuous ox shall be cleared, indicating that only for an innocuous ox is one exempt from paying compensation for miscarried offspring, but for a forewarned ox, the owner is liable. Abaye said to him, if that is so, then with regard to compensation for humiliation, which is derived from the verse Deuteronomy 25:11, when men struggled together, a man and his brother, and the wife of one of them drew near to deliver her husband from the hand of the one who smites him, and extended her hand and grabbed his genitals. Let us say this as well. Only men are liable to pay for humiliation, but the owner, men meaning humans, But the owner of oxen that are comparable to men is not liable. Just as men are categorically considered forewarned, so too the oxen, which are contrasted with men in this case, are considered forewarned as well. And as for damages paid for humiliation, if it's caused by innocuous oxen, their owners are also exempt due to a kal v'chomer inference. So the merciful one then wrote that the owner of the innocuous ox shall be clear, indicating that only for an innocuous ox is one exempt from paying compensation for humiliation, but for a forewarned ox that causes not only physical damage but humiliation, the owner of that forewarned ox will be liable to pay humiliation. And if you would say that indeed that is the law according to Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, if so, let the Baraisa teach. Let the Baraisa teach that with regard to the verse, the owner of the ox shall be clear. Rabbi Yosei HaGalili it should have said that with regard to this verse, the owner of the ox shall be clear. Rabbi Yosei HaGalili says he is exempt from paying compensation. He is exempt both from paying compensation for miscarried offspring and from paying compensation for humiliation. So Rava then retracted this explanation of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili's opinion. And rather, Abaye and Rava both say that Rabbi Akiva's inference is correct, according to Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, but with regard to the continuation of the verse. But if any harm follows, you shall give life for life, Exodus 21:22. So with regard to men, if they're men who fight and a woman who's standing nearby gets hurt and she miscarries, with regard to men, if there is no harm caused to the woman, i.e. she is not killed, they shall be punished financially for the miscarriage, and they're liable to pay compensation. But if there is harm caused to the woman and she dies, they shall not be punished financially. Why? We've seen this a bunch of times. You're not punished financially in the bigger case, right? Because you're liable to the death penalty. And when you're liable to the death penalty, you're not also liable to pay a financial penalty. It's one or the other. So if these men are subject to the death penalty for striking a woman and she dies, they're not also going to have to pay damages if she miscarries during that. So this distinction applies only with regard to humans, but not with regard to oxen, as even if there is harm caused to the woman, the owners shall be punished financially. In order to preclude this inference, the merciful one then wrote in the Torah, the owner of the ox shall be clear, to teach that he is exempt from paying compensation for miscarried offspring, at least when we're talking about an innocuous ox. So Rav Ada bar Ahava objects to this. Is this to say that the issue of financial liability is dependent on whether or not there was harm caused to the woman? Clearly, the issue is dependent on whether there was intent to strike the woman. So rather, Rav Ada bar Ahava said a different inference. With regard to humans, in a case where they intended to strike each other, even if there is harm caused to this bystander, the woman, and she dies, they shall be punished financially and are liable to pay compensation for miscarried offspring. But when they intended to strike the woman herself, they shall not be punished financially, as they are liable to receive court-imposed capital punishment. But this distinction does not apply with regard to oxen, as even if they intended to strike the woman herself, their owners shall be punished. In order to preclude this inference, the merciful one writes, the owner of the ox shall be clear, to teach that the owners are exempt from paying compensation for miscarried offspring. And similarly, when Rav Chagai came from the south, he came and brought a baraisa in his hand that interprets the verse in accordance with the explanation of Rav Ada bar Ahava. Now, it is taught in another baraisa, with regard to the verse, the owner of the ox shall be clear, that Rabbi Akiva says, this statement teaches that if an innocuous ox kills a Canaanite slave, its owner shall be clear from paying compensation for the slave. Unlike the case of a forewarned ox that killed a Canaanite slave, where the ox's owner is liable. Now on 42b. So the Gemara asks, but let Rabbi Akiva say to himself the same objection that he raised against Rabbi Eliezer's interpretation of the verse, that the owner of an innocuous ox is exempt from paying half a ransom. A muad ox that kills a person, the owner has to pay the ransom, the kofar, the atonement payment, in addition to damages. But the owner of an innocuous ox not only doesn't have to pay a half ransom, he pays no ransom. Right? So why is it necessary for the verse to teach this? But isn't compensation for damage caused by an innocuous ox itself paid only from the value of the ox's body, as opposed to having recourse to the owner's property in the case of a forewarned ox, a muad, a habitual gorer? So therefore, its owner can say to the slave's owner, bring it to court and you will be paid from it. Since the ox was stoned, there is nothing from which he can collect payment. So Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak said Rabbi Akiva's interpretation is applicable in a case where its owners slaughtered it first, before it was sentenced to stoning. So lest you say that the slave's owner should be paid from the value of the dead ox, the verse teaches us that since the ox was subject to being stoned, right, to being killed because it killed a person, although its owner slaughtered it, the slave's owner should not be paid from it because no one can derive benefit from the body of that ox. So the Gemara asks, if so, why did Rabbi Akiva raise the objection against Rabbi Eliezer's interpretation? According to Rabbi Eliezer as well, it could be explained as referring to a case where the owner slaughtered it first before it was stoned to death. So the Gemara answers, indeed, Rabbi Eliezer's interpretation could also be explained in this manner. And the reason that Rabbi Akiva raised this objection was because he reasons, perhaps Rabbi Eliezer has another explanation that is better than this one, and will state it. So Rabbi Eliezer did in fact respond with another explanation. And that's what we had at the end of yesterday's class. So the Gemara asks, but let Rabbi Eliezer also answer him that the owner slaughtered it first. Why did he offer a different explanation? We're talking about why did the Torah include this seemingly extraneous language, right? That when an ox kills a person, that ox shall be stoned, and it shall not be eaten, which we would know from the fact that it was stoned and not shechted, not slaughtered. So why does the Torah say it cannot be eaten? We already knew that. This is to tell you that even if it is shechted before the court imposes the death penalty on the ox, still it cannot be eaten. And then there's also the phrase, the owner shall be clear, which the sages use to teach the lesson, that and also no benefit can be derived from its carcass. Right, so the Gemara asks, but let Rabbi Eliezer also answer him that the owner slaughtered it first before it was stoned. Why did he offer a different explanation? And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Eliezer could have said to you specifically there in the case Rabbi Eliezer referred to in his explanation, namely where the ox intended to kill another animal, but it killed a person instead. Since the ox was not subject to be killed at all, it might enter your mind to say that he should be liable to pay, the owner should be liable to pay a half ransom from the ox's body, and therefore the verse is necessary to exclude the owner from liability to pay half a ransom. But here, since the ox was initially subject to be killed, a verse is not necessary to teach that the owner is exempt from paying a half ransom, even if he slaughtered it. The ox is put down, but the owner is not liable to pay that. So the Gemara asks, but according to Rabbi Akiva also, certainly it is so, that a verse is not necessary to teach that if the owner slaughters the ox before its verdict, he is exempt from liability. Rather, Rav Asi said the above explanation of Rabbi Akiva's interpretation should be rejected. As I heard this following statement from a great man. And who is he? Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina. And this is what he said. It might enter your mind to say that since Rabbi Akiva says in the Mishna on page 33a that in a case where a person and an innocuous ox damaged each other concurrently, the owner of an innocuous ox that injured a person also pays the full cost of the damage with regard to the difference between the two valuations of the damage, as there is no distinction between an innocuous ox and a forewarned ox with regard to injuries caused to a person. Compensation for the slave would also be paid from his superior quality property, not from the body of the ox, just as in a case where a forewarned ox kills a slave. Therefore, its owner cannot say, bring it to court and you will be paid from it. You might have said that. To counter this possibility, the merciful one wrote, the owner of the ox shall be clear, indicating that he is exempt from liability. So Rabbi Zera said to Rav Ashi, but didn't Rabbi Akiva already break the force of his fist? Meaning, he qualified his opinion of this, as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Akiva says, one might have thought that if the owner of an innocuous ox injured a person, he pays compensation from his superior quality property the same as the owner of a forewarned ox. Therefore, the verse states, according to this judgment shall be done to him. Lo, Exodus 21:31, indicating that he pays restitution exclusively from the body of the ox, but he does not pay from his superior quality property, as the word lo also means to it, and this negates Rav Asi's explanation of Rabbi Akiva's interpretation. So rather, Rava said a different explanation of Rabbi Akiva's statement. The verse is necessary because it might enter your mind to say that since I, referring to the Torah, am more stringent with regard to a forewarned ox that kills a person in the case of a Canaanite slave than in the case of a free man, as in the case of a free man who was worth 1 selah, the owner of the ox gives 1 selah in ransom. And if he was worth 30 selah, he gives 30. But in the case of a Canaanite slave, the Torah imposes a fixed amount. So even if the slave was only worth 1 selah, the owner still gives 30 selah to the owner of the dead slave. Therefore, since the Torah is more stringent in the case of a Canaanite slave, payment for the slave should also be paid from the owner's superior quality property. To counter this, the merciful one writes, the owner of the ox shall be clear, indicating that payment is not required in a case where an innocuous ox kills the slave. You see, these sages are keep the debate going. Why did the Torah add this seemingly extraneous phrase, and the owner of the ox shall be clear? What does it mean? We're still arguing. It is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the explanation of Rava to Rabbi Akiva's statement. And that Baraisa states that with regard to the verse, the owner of the ox shall be clear, Rabbi Akiva says he shall be clear from payment for a Canaanite slave. And Rabbi Akiva discusses this particular interpretation. And could this law not be derived through logical inference without the verse? Since the Torah deemed him liable to pay for the killing of a slave and deemed him liable for the killing of a free man as well, just as when the Torah deemed him liable for a free man, you distinguish between an innocuous ox and a forewarned ox, as no ransom is paid in the case of an innocuous ox. So too, when the Torah deemed him liable for a slave, let us distinguish between an innocuous ox and a forewarned ox. Furthermore, this law could be proven through a kal vachomer inference. If, in the case of a free man, where he, the owner, gives his full value, you distinguish between an innocuous ox and a forewarned ox, with regard to a slave, where he gives only 30 selah and not more, even if the slave was worth more, is it not logical that we would distinguish between an innocuous ox and a forewarned ox and exempt him from liability for an innocuous ox? And Rabbi Akiva, having posed this, you could say, rejects it. No, one could disagree and say the opposite. I, meaning the Torah, am more stringent with regard to the case of a slave than with regard to that of a free man. As for a free man worth 1 selah, the ox's owner gives only 1 selah, and if he is worth 30, he gives 30. But in the case of a slave, even if the slave was worth only 1 selah, the owner gives 30 selah to the owner of the slave. Therefore, one might have thought that he should be liable to pay for a slave killed by his innocuous ox. To counter this, the verse states, the owner of the ox shall be clear, indicating that he shall be clear from paying compensation for a slave. The sages taught. The verse states with regard to a forewarned ox, but if the ox was a goring ox in time past, and warning has been given to its owner, and he has not secured it, and it killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned. That's Exodus 21:29. Rabbi Akiva said, and what does this come to teach us? If it is to deem the owner liable for the killing of a woman just as for the killing of a man, well, this has already been stated with regard to an innocuous ox, where it is stated, when an ox gores a man or a woman and they die, the ox shall be stoned. Rather, that was Exodus 21:28. So rather, the first verse I read, 21:29, the verse is stated to compare a woman to a man with regard to a different issue. Namely, just as with regard to a man, payment for his injuries is paid to his heirs if he died, so too with regard to a woman, payment for her injuries is paid to her heirs and not to her husband. So the Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Akiva hold that a husband does not inherit from his wife? But isn't it taught in a baraisa? The verse states, and he shall inherit it, ota. Numbers 27:11. From here it is derived that the husband inherits from his wife, as ota also means her. And this is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Reish Lakish said, Rabbi Akiva says that her heirs and not her husband receive the payment only with regard to the ransom, since it is paid only posthumously and is therefore considered property due to her. And the husband does not take as an inheritance the property that is due to the deceased as he does the property that she possessed. For instance, an inheritance that would have gone to the woman had she been alive is not awarded to the husband, but rather to her other heirs. And what is the reason for the assumption that even if it is clear that the victim is about to die, the husband is not owed ransom? The verse states, quote, and it killed a man or a woman. The ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death, right? This is if you have a habitually goring ox that has killed people before and now kills another, we put the owner to death. So if a ransom is laid on him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is laid on him, indicating that the owner's liability to pay ransom is dependent on the ox's liability to be stoned, which in turn applies only after the death of a victim. So the Gemara asks, and with regard to damages, did Rabbi Akiva not say that damages due to a wife are paid to her heirs and not to her husband? Just as with regard to ransom, but isn't it taught in a baraisa? I'm almost done. Questions or comments, get them in. But isn't it taught in a baraisa if an assailant struck the woman and her offspring emerged due to miscarriage, he gives compensation for damage and pain to the woman and compensation for miscarried offspring to the husband. If the husband is not alive, he gives the compensation to the offspring, gives the compensation for the offspring, the miscarried offspring, to the heirs of the husband. So if the woman is not alive, he gives payment owed to her heirs. And if she was a Canaanite maidservant, meaning a slave, and then she was emancipated and subsequently married a Canaanite slave who had also been emancipated and became pregnant from him, or if she was a convert who became pregnant from a male convert, and both the husband and the wife died without heirs, then the assailant gains by not having to pay, since there are no heirs. In any event, it is explicitly stated in this baraisa that the beneficiary of the compensation due to her, including that which she would have received during her lifetime, is not her husband, but rather her heirs. And Rabbi Akiva said that. So Rabbah said this baraisa relates to a divorcee. Since they got divorced, the husband does not inherit from her. Likewise, Rav Nachman said the baraisa relates to a divorcee. And the sages said in response, if she is a divorcee, she should also share in the compensation for the miscarried offspring. Why should her ex-husband receive that payment? Tune in tomorrow to find out. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let's see if we've got any questions. Load. It appears there are no questions. Okay. Unless something comes in. No questions. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. It was complicated. I'm not surprised, not so many questions. But with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular time, noon Pacific. Have a great night. And remember that tonight is Zois Hanukkah. Zois or Zot Hanukkah, meaning this is Hanukkah. The 8th night, right? Hanukkah is all about celebrating the miracle of our salvation at the time of the Hasmoneans and the uprising against the Syrian Greeks. And tragically, it was also a civil war against all those other Jews that were going to just, side with the Greeks and abandon Torah forever. And a miracle was performed, and we celebrate that miracle of Jewish continuity. So the 8th night, right? Remember that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. God created nature in 6 days and rested on the 7th. And that's why the whole world operates in 7-day weeks. 8 is beyond nature, right? So 8 represents miracles, represents beyond nature. So the 8th day of Hanukkah is an incredibly propitious time for revealed miracles, to pray for the miracle that you need, and let us all pray for the miracle that we all need. Let there be a safe and secure peace reestablished in Israel. Let the war end. Let all the hostages be brought home. Let all the soldiers come home safely. We've really lost a lot. And let this war be prosecuted effectively, completely, and be done. And let us be victorious and reestablish a secure peace. And may you, if you need a miracle in your life, may you be blessed with that miracle. All the best. Hag Sameach. A happy Hanukkah to you. And may it be a time of revealed miracles. Amen.